Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
My name is Brian Taylor Evans, and no, I am not the Bayfield Ripper. I'm 38 years old and was married for 7 years to Diana Summers Evans, who was 34. We don't have children, though we had discussed adopting. However, if I pursue adoption, it will be as a single man or not at all. Diana wasn't fully committed to the idea, and eventually I discovered why. I'm a small-town pastor with a secret. Under a pseudonym, I write romance and young adult novels. Writing has been a passion of mine since high school, though I didn't start submitting my work until college. I later rewrote those early stories and continued crafting new ones. While my novels have subtle spiritual themes, they are mainstream and widely popular. My congregation consists of about 60 regular attendees plus the occasional visitor or out-of-town member from the regional church network. Despite offers to lead larger congregations, I've chosen to stay in this small town for a few reasons. I love the simplicity of small-town life, and a bigger church would leave me with little time for writing. Additionally, larger congregations often come with their share of nosy church members who might uncover my secret. Here, the only real gossip comes from Mrs. Charlotte Weston, but her focus is more on who's arguing with whom than anything else. My story begins during my time in the Air Force, when I was assigned as a chaplain's assistant. My role was twofold: to accompany Chaplain Major Gregory Hart on his visits to remote bases and to act as his protector in dangerous situations. It was a unique assignment, blending spiritual care with operational readiness, and I took my responsibilities seriously. I was rated as an expert marksman with both the Beretta M9 pistol and the M16 rifle. I also knew my way around heavier firepower like the M240 machine gun and the M249 squad automatic weapon. At first, I underestimated Chaplain Hart. I thought his talks about courage and selflessness were more about boosting morale than genuine conviction, but that changed one morning in 2015, when we landed at a forward operating base in Iraq. It was a Saturday, and we were holding a worship service for off-duty personnel. The atmosphere was calm, with soldiers taking a brief respite from the chaos of war to find peace and reflection. Partway through the service, a sudden mortar barrage shattered the moment. Explosions ripped through the compound, sending shrapnel and debris everywhere. Soldiers dove for cover, and cries of pain filled the air. Miraculously, I wasn't hit, but chaos reigned all around us. Amid the pandemonium, Chaplain Hart's response stunned me. Instead of taking cover like most people would, he dashed into the open, running toward the wounded and dying without hesitation. He began dragging soldiers to safety, pulling them behind barriers or into bunkers to shield them from further harm. Instinct kicked in, and I sprinted after him, determined to fulfill my role as his protector. My heart raced as I tried to cover him with my weapon, scanning for any threats. While the explosions continued to rain down, bullets weren't flying yet, but the mortar rounds were close enough to make the ground shake beneath us. Chaplain Hart moved with purpose and courage that defied logic. He didn't stop to consider his safety, nor did he falter in the face of danger. As I fought to keep him safe, I realized I wasn't just trying to protect a chaplain. I was witnessing a man embodying the values he preached: selflessness, bravery, and unwavering faith. My respect for him grew tenfold that day, as did my understanding of what true courage looked like. The mortar shells started falling with an unsettling rhythm, one every 5 seconds, pounding the compound relentlessly for what seemed like an eternity but was likely only 3 minutes. When it was finally over, the destruction left behind was staggering. At least a dozen soldiers had taken shrapnel wounds, some minor, others severe. Remarkably, Chaplain Hart emerged from the chaos unscathed. His uniform, however, told a different story. It was riddled with small holes, evidence of the countless near misses as shrapnel tore through the air around him. I wasn't as fortunate. One of the final shells in the barrage found me. The impact was excruciating, sending sharp pain radiating through my body. A jagged piece of shrapnel struck my left shin, just below the knee, snapping the bone cleanly. Additional fragments peppered other parts of my body, but most of the wounds were superficial, with shards lodged just beneath the skin. None were life-threatening, but the broken leg rendered me immobile and effectively out of the fight. I managed to drag myself into the shade of a Humvee, using it as cover while doing what I could to help the other casualties nearby. From there, I watched as the soldiers of the forward operating base sprang into action to repel the attack. What came next felt like a scene ripped straight from a war movie. Insurgents launched a furious charge toward the compound, screaming at the top of their lungs. It was a terrifying, almost surreal sight as they stormed forward en masse, only to be met with the overwhelming firepower of the defenders. It was brutal and chaotic. The insurgents fell in droves, but their sheer numbers made them a force to reckon with. The first wave was repelled, leaving the ground littered with the bodies of fallen attackers, but the respite was short-lived. After regrouping, the insurgents mounted a second charge just 10 minutes later. This assault, too, ended in failure as the defenders held their ground with grit and determination. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely no more than 30 minutes, the fighting subsided. Amid the chaos, my eyes were glued to Chaplain Hart. He moved like a man possessed, fearlessly navigating the battlefield. He didn't just offer spiritual support. He was in the thick of it, encouraging the soldiers, passing out ammunition to those holding the line, and even dragging more of the wounded to safety near my position. What I witnessed defied explanation. I could swear I saw bullets pass clean through his uniform 3 or 4 times, the fabric visibly jumping from the impact. Yet, astonishingly, he didn't falter, didn't bleed, and didn't seem to feel a thing. Whether it was divine intervention or sheer luck, I'll never know, but in that moment, he seemed untouchable. A figure of unwavering courage amidst the chaos of war. When the gunfire finally ceased and the compound fell silent, Chaplain Hart made his way to the area where the wounded had been gathered. Without hesitation, he began assisting the medics, doing everything he could to help stabilize the injured. Despite the exhaustion and chaos of the battle, he moved with a calm determination that had become his trademark. As he bent over me to assess my injuries, I noticed something was wrong. He suddenly started coughing, a deep, wet sound that immediately set off alarms in my mind. When he wiped his mouth, I saw the unmistakable sight of frothy blood staining his hand. My heart sank. Frothy blood was a sign of a lung injury, likely from a gunshot. "Major, you're hit," I exclaimed, pushing him down gently to prevent him from exerting himself further. Ignoring the pain in my leg, I tore open his uniform blouse to locate the wound. Sure enough, there was an entry wound on his chest. I grabbed a bandage from my first aid pouch and pressed it firmly against the wound, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. I shouted for a medic, my voice rising above the muffled sounds of groans and distant orders being barked. Luck was on our side, as a medic was already heading in our direction. He took one look at the injury and immediately recognized the severity of the situation. Without a word, he sprinted toward the radio shack to coordinate a medical evacuation. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, though it was only a few moments before the medic returned. By then, Chaplain Hart had lost consciousness, his body finally succumbing to the trauma. The medic quickly started a bag of plasma and handed it to me. "Hold this steady," he instructed, his voice firm but calm. "Evac choppers are 5 minutes out." I nodded, gripping the 4-bag with one hand while maintaining pressure on the wound with the other. My injuries and the pain in my leg were momentarily forgotten as I focused on keeping the chaplain alive. When the helicopters arrived, the wounded were carefully loaded aboard. I was placed on the same chopper as Chaplain Hart, refusing to let go of my makeshift responsibilities. As we ascended into the sky, I held the 4-bag aloft with one hand and kept the pressure bandage secure with the other. The whir of the rotors was deafening, but all I could hear was the faint, labored sound of Chaplain Hart's breathing. When we arrived at the base hospital, I was immediately taken into surgery to address my injuries. Hours later, I woke up groggy and disoriented in a crowded ward filled with about 20 other casualties. My body ached, and my mind raced, but I was too far removed from anyone who could tell me what had happened to Chaplain Hart. When a nurse passed by, I mustered the strength to ask her for news about him. She nodded and said she would find out. The wait felt agonizing, every second stretching into an eternity as I replayed the events over and over in my head, questioning if I could have done more. About an hour later, the nurse returned, her face somber. "I'm sorry, Sergeant," she said gently. "The major didn't make it. He passed away in the evacuation chopper. The corpsman told me they had to physically remove you from him." Her words hit me like a freight train. The weight of them sank deep into my chest, crushing the breath out of me. My resolve crumbled, and I broke down, sobbing, unable to contain the guilt and sorrow that overwhelmed me. The nurse must have panicked at my reaction because she adjusted something in my 4. The next thing I knew, my thoughts were hazy, and I drifted into a deep, drug-induced sleep. When I finally regained full consciousness, I found myself in a much smaller ward. There were only 4 beds, and all but mine were empty, except for one, which was occupied by a light colonel with medical tabs on his blouse. He introduced himself as Dr. Mitchell, a psychiatrist assigned to the unit. "Sergeant Evans, I'm Dr. Mitchell," he began, his voice calm but probing. "Do you want to tell me what happened? The nurses mentioned you were crying and caused some commotion in the larger ward." I hesitated, but the words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. "I'm sorry for causing trouble, sir," I said, my voice shaky. "But I failed in my primary duty. I was assigned to protect my chaplain, Major Gregory Hart, and I didn't. He died while I was trying to stop the bleeding during the flight from the FOB. I couldn't save him." "Did you do everything you could?" Dr. Mitchell asked, his tone calm but firm. "I did everything I knew how to do," I replied, my voice breaking. Tears streamed down my face as the words poured out. The major wouldn't take cover. He was out there dragging or helping the wounded, passing ammunition to the men holding the walls. When it was over, he came to me, and I couldn't save him. I was supposed to protect him. Dr. Mitchell studied me, his expression kind but firm. "Brian, you were injured yourself. What could you have done on one leg?" "I could have been there with him," I said, my frustration and guilt bubbling to the surface. "If I'd been at his side, maybe I would have taken the hit instead of him. Greg didn't deserve to die like that." The doctor sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Brian, no one deserves to die like that. Not even the enemy. But this is war. Tragedy happens, and sometimes, no matter what we do, we can't stop it. You are not to blame. There is nothing you could have done to change the outcome except to put yourself in harm's way, and that wouldn't have saved him either. It would only mean more loss." His words struck deep, but the guilt still clung to me, heavy and unrelenting. Dr. Mitchell continued, his voice steady. "Brian, what you're experiencing is a severe case of survivor's guilt. It's not uncommon among soldiers, but it's serious and can't be ignored. I'm recommending that you be transferred stateside to another military hospital, where you can get the treatment and support you need to work through this." His words offered a small glimmer of hope, but they didn't lighten the burden I carried. Still, I nodded, understanding that healing, even if it felt impossible at that moment, was the only way forward. After 6 weeks in the psychiatric ward at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, I was surprised to receive a visitor. It was Mrs. Hart, the chaplain's wife. The sight of her brought a flood of emotions: grief, guilt, and the crushing weight of failure. She introduced herself with a warm yet somber tone. "Good morning, Brian. I'm Emily Hart, Greg's wife. I've been meaning to visit you ever since I heard about what happened. A nurse who treated you in Iraq shared the story of what you did for Greg, how you tried to save him. I want you to know how much that means to me." Her words were kind, but the pain of losing Major Hart still gnawed at me. She continued, her voice steady but filled with compassion. "I also spoke with the doctor who tried to revive Greg. He told me that Greg's wound was catastrophic. A bullet that went through his lung and into his heart. He said Greg should have died instantly. Nothing you could have done would have changed that." I lowered my gaze, struggling to hold back tears as she spoke. Emily paused, then added, "I want you to know something else. Greg thought highly of you. He even mentioned that he saw potential in you, thought you might have a future as a pastor." She smiled softly. "He did admit you didn't always seem to absorb everything he tried to teach you." Her attempt at lightening the mood didn't fully lift the weight from my chest, but her words brought a flicker of warmth amidst the darkness. Hearing that Major Hart had valued me, even in a small way, was something I hadn't realized how much I needed. Then she caught me off guard. "I know it will be some time before you're discharged," she said, "but I'd like to make you an offer. If you choose to attend Summit Bible College in Iowa and complete your bachelor's degree in any discipline, the church has agreed to cover all your school expenses. It's a small, church-affiliated college that primarily offers ministry degrees, but they also have programs in English and business. The teaching is, of course, faith-based. What do you think?" Her words left me stunned. "That's incredibly generous," I replied after a pause. "I'll need some time to think about it. I'm not sure what I've done to deserve such an opportunity, but I promise to give it serious consideration. I've been told it'll be early spring before I'm discharged, so I'll make my decision before then." Emily nodded, her expression understanding. Then I asked, "Will you be in town long?" "I have a couple of award ceremonies to attend," she explained, "but I'll probably only be in San Antonio for a few days, no longer than the weekend. After that, I'll need to return to Iowa. If it's all right with you, I'd like to visit you while I'm still here." "I'd really like that," I said softly. "I don't have any family. I'm an orphan, so I don't get visitors." "Thank you, Mrs. Hart." What I didn't know at the time was that Emily had a much bigger reason for being at the hospital. Friday morning, I received unexpected orders to put on my dress uniform. Because of the cast on my leg, the pants had been modified, split at the seam and fitted with snaps to accommodate the injury. A wheelchair was brought in, and I was pushed out toward the parade grounds. As we approached, I saw Emily on stage. When she caught sight of me, she smiled warmly, and I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. I was wheeled up the ramp to where she was standing. "Emily?" I asked, feeling both confused and out of place. "What am I doing here? I was told to put on my clown suit, and then they rolled me out here." Her smile grew mischievous, like she was keeping a secret. "All in good time, Brian," she replied. "All in good time." Before I could press further, my wheelchair was positioned so I was facing the audience next to Emily. Moments later, the base commander and the hospital commander stepped onto the stage. As protocol dictated, I saluted them, and they returned the gesture before taking their seats. Emily sat on one side of me, the commander on the other. The hospital commander leaned toward me, his voice kind but professional. "Sergeant Evans, how's the recovery coming along? Are you staying on track?" I nodded, though still unsure of what this gathering was about. "Yes, sir," I replied, "making steady progress. I've been told the device on my leg should come off in about 1 to 2 months. The doctors think the bones will be fully healed, and the rehab should take about 2 months after that. I should be able to return to duty by early summer." "Well, don't rush it. You need to be fully recovered before any assessment will be made. If you rush, you could set that date back. I've seen it too many times." With that said, he turned and watched as they brought several other patients up on stage. Some were pushing those who could not walk. In the distance, the sound of marching feet and cadence calls grew louder. Several companies of soldiers marched onto the parade grounds and passed in review. The unit flag bearers dipped their respective flags to acknowledge the supremacy of the stars and stripes. The platoon leaders and company officers saluted the flag and the commanders. The companies formed upon the grounds. When the last company was in place, the base commander walked to the microphone and called, "Platoon leaders, call your troops at ease." Again, the synchronized sound of boots striking the ground was heard. The commander, a 2-star general, started speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, this ceremony is to celebrate some promotions and honor some brave people for extraordinary actions. We will try to keep this short, as the day promises to be a typical Texas spring day, hot and uncomfortable. As there are several things to do today, we will start with promotions and follow that with awards and citations." The commander began announcing promotions, including 3 soldiers being promoted to corporal and 1 to sergeant. Once those were completed, he called all the names of the soldiers on stage, including mine. We were awarded our Purple Hearts, each soldier saluting as they received the medal. Then the commander said, "We have 2 special awards to present today. These are both for extreme bravery in action. First, we need to promote 1 soldier who has not yet been announced. Pinning the sergeant insignia on Sergeant Brian Evans will be Mrs. Emily Hart, wife of Major Gregory Hart, with whom Sergeant Evans served in Major Hart's final action." Emily stepped forward with the insignia and pinned it on my sleeve over my specialist rank. She bent down and kissed me on the cheek, then whispered, "Thank you for what you did for Greg. He really relied on you and admired you." Her words left me misty-eyed, but I managed to salute the commanders and the flag as protocol required. The commander began again, his voice steady as he addressed the audience. "I am now going to read the citation accompanying the next award," he said. "The ranks listed will reflect those held at the time of the action. For extraordinary heroism, Sergeant Brian Evans is awarded the Bronze Star with Valor." He cleared his throat and read the citation aloud. "Sergeant Brian T. Evans, despite being wounded himself, protected all of the injured personnel at Forward Operating Base Carson. When the fighting was over, he attempted to care for Major Gregory Hart, who was mortally wounded in the same action. While on the evacuation helicopter, Sergeant Evans remained with Major Hart until both were placed under medical care. Signed, President of the United States. The commander stepped back, and Emily came forward again, pinning the medal on my dress jacket. She kissed me on the cheek once more and whispered, "Thank you again, Brian. You'll never know how much Greg trusted and respected you." After saluting again, I returned to my seat as the commander prepared to present the final award. "This last award," the commander said, pausing briefly as he steadied his voice, "is a painful one for me, as I had the honor of serving with the recipient." He called out to the platoon leaders, "Troops, attention!" The thunder of synchronized boots striking the ground echoed across the grounds. "This Distinguished Service Cross is awarded posthumously to Major Gregory Hart, chaplain. His actions were above and beyond the call of duty during an insurgent attack on Forward Operating Base Carson. The major went to extraordinary lengths to recover and secure the wounded during the first mortar attacks. Even after being wounded himself, he proceeded to resupply the troops with ammunition at the combat stations and continued recovering the injured. When the battle was over, the major collapsed from his wounds while checking on the injured. Despite extensive efforts, he succumbed on the evacuation helicopter. Signed, President of the United States. The commander stepped forward and presented the medal in a polished case to Emily, who was silently crying as she held my hand. She accepted the case with quiet dignity and nodded in gratitude. "This concludes the ceremony," the commander announced. "Platoon leaders, dismiss your troops." The troops erupted into motion, the sound of chatter and boots marking the end of the formal event. For me, it marked something deeper, a moment of recognition for what had happened that day, the loss of someone I admired, and the actions I wished I could have done differently. As I continued my recovery, I spent much of my time reflecting on the past, writing about my experiences in both fiction and memoir formats. While still at Brooke Army Medical Center, I decided to take Emily up on her offer to attend Summit Bible College. I called her 2 weeks before my discharge to let her know. The drive from San Antonio, Texas to Cedar Grove, Iowa, took 2 long days. When I arrived at the college registrar's office, they pointed me to a local apartment that was available. I called the number, only to be surprised when Emily answered. "Brian, it's wonderful to hear from you," she said warmly. "Likewise," I replied. "I heard about an apartment and wanted to check it out. Can I stop by and take a look?" "I'd love that," she said, her excitement evident. "In fact, the apartment is over my garage. Come by now. I'll have lunch ready." When I arrived, I was greeted by Emily and a young woman named Grace Carter, a junior at Summit Bible College. Grace, who was 21, had been renting the apartment but was planning to move into a house closer to campus with friends. After showing me the apartment, which was ideal for my needs, Emily offered me the space at a reduced rate in exchange for some light yard work and maintenance. Over the next few months, I settled into my new life in Cedar Grove, dividing my time between studying, writing, and helping Emily around her property. Emily's persistent matchmaking efforts became apparent when Grace started joining us for meals. While I appreciated her intent, I wasn't ready to dive into a new relationship. Eventually, though, Grace and I began spending more time together, and I mustered the courage to ask her out. She hesitated but eventually agreed, saying she'd been unsure if I was interested. Our first date led to many more, and soon we were inseparable. Grace and I grew closer over time, and as the months passed, our relationship blossomed. Between my studies, part-time writing, and my ongoing responsibilities at Emily's property, life became a whirlwind of activity. Grace was supportive of my goals, and her kindness and laughter brought a brightness to my days that I hadn't realized I was missing. One evening, about a year into our relationship, Grace and I were walking through the campus gardens after dinner. The warm glow of the campus lights reflected off the lake nearby, and the crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of fallen leaves. "Brian," she asked softly, "where do you see us going?" I stopped walking and turned to face her, the sincerity in her voice catching me off guard. "Grace," I began, "I love you. I haven't said it before because I didn't want to rush anything, but it's true. I see us building a life together. I want to marry you, but I don't want to hold you back. I don't know if my future as a pastor will provide much stability or if I'll even have a church to serve." She smiled warmly, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "Brian, my father's a pastor, remember? I know what the life of a pastor's wife entails. It can't be worse than growing up as a pastor's kid." I laughed, her humor breaking the tension. "Okay," I said, smiling. "When I graduate, will you marry me?" "On the day you graduate," she replied playfully. "I will say yes and make you the happiest man alive. But we might wait a day or two to get married." The months flew by, and when graduation arrived, Grace kept her promise. We married in a small ceremony at Emily's home, surrounded by close friends and family. It was a simple yet beautiful celebration of love and commitment. Shortly after our wedding, I was assigned as an associate pastor at a church in Lansing, Michigan. The position came with a modest salary and a small parsonage. To make ends meet, I also took a part-time job doing maintenance work at a local factory. Our life was far from luxurious, but we were happy. 2 years later, an opportunity arose for me to lead a small congregation in Red River, Minnesota. It was a struggling church with only about 50 members, but it came with a small house next to the church and the chance to truly serve a community in need. First, everything seemed to fall into place. The congregation welcomed us with open arms, and Grace quickly became involved in church activities, teaching Sunday school and organizing community events. But after another 2 years, I noticed a change in her. She seemed distracted, often lost in thought, and her usual enthusiasm for church life began to wane. One evening, as we were preparing for bed, Grace brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. "Brian," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about taking a part-time job in town, just something small, to get out of the house a bit." I nodded. "If that's what you want, I'm okay with it. Just make sure it's something that won't interfere with the church or reflect poorly on the congregation." She smiled faintly and kissed me goodnight, but her tone and demeanor left me unsettled. Over the next few months, the distance between us grew. Grace withdrew from teaching Sunday school and resigned from the church choir. She still helped with hospital visits when needed, but her heart didn't seem to be in it. Then one afternoon, Mrs. Beasley, a longtime member of the congregation, pulled me aside. "Pastor," she began hesitantly, "I thought you should know. I heard Grace left her job weeks ago." Her words stunned me. Grace had been leaving the house as if going to work every day. What was she doing instead? That night, I confronted her. "Grace, I called the office where you were working. They told me you quit 2 weeks ago. Where have you been going?" Her face turned pale, and tears welled in her eyes. "Brian, I've made a terrible mistake," she confessed. "I don't know how to tell you this, but I've been meeting someone else, and now I'm pregnant." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The room spun, and for a moment I couldn't speak. "When did this start?" I finally asked, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. "About 3 months ago," she admitted. "It didn't mean anything at first, but—" She trailed off, unable to meet my gaze. I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my composure. "Grace, I trusted you. I've done everything I could to build a life with you. Why?" Tears streamed down her face. "I was lost, Brian. I felt like I couldn't keep up with your faith, your calling. I thought you deserved someone better, someone stronger." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Grace, I deserve honesty at the very least. You should have come to me when you started feeling this way, before it came to this." She nodded, her tears falling freely. "I know. I was scared, and I didn't want to admit how far I drifted. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I am truly sorry for what I've done. The other man, he's abandoned me. I don't know what to do." I stared at her, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical burden. "You've put us both in an impossible situation," I said finally. "But I can't see a way forward for us, not after this." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The damage was too deep, and my trust in her had been shattered. "Grace," I continued, "I'm filing for divorce. You'll need to leave the parsonage. I'll help you as much as I can, but I can't stay in this marriage." That Sunday, I preached a sermon titled Forgiveness Without Forgetting. It was one of the hardest sermons I'd ever delivered, knowing that many in the congregation already suspected something was wrong. I spoke about the biblical call to forgive but emphasized that forgiveness doesn't mean excusing wrongdoing or erasing consequences. After the service, Grace asked to speak to the congregation. I was hesitant but agreed. She stood before the church, her voice trembling as she addressed them. "I know many of you have heard rumors," she began. "I won't go into detail, but I've wronged my husband and betrayed his trust. He's done nothing to deserve this. and I take full responsibility for my actions. I've decided to leave the congregation and the town to give Brian the space he needs to heal. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused and for the hurt I've brought to this church. When she finished, she walked to the altar, removed her wedding ring, and placed it on the pulpit before leaving the sanctuary. In the weeks that followed, I informed the church board of my intention to resign. The decision wasn't unanimous. Some members believed I should stay, but I felt it was the right thing to do. The board agreed to let me remain until they could find a replacement. 3 weeks later, the church welcomed a new pastor, a young woman from a nearby congregation who had glowing recommendations. On my final Sunday, I addressed the congregation one last time. Serving this church has been one of the greatest honors of my life, I said. Though my personal journey has taken an unexpected turn, I am grateful for the love and support you've shown me. I pray that this church continues to grow and thrive under new leadership. After leaving the church, I returned to Cedar Grove, Iowa, and moved into the apartment over Emily's garage. She welcomed me back with open arms and suggested I apply for a position teaching creative writing at Summit Bible College. "Brian," she said, "this could be a fresh start for you. The English department could use someone with your background, and you'd still have the flexibility to write and guest preach if you want to." I took her advice, submitting my application along with copies of my published works. A few weeks later, I was offered an adjunct teaching position. It wasn't long before I found myself standing in front of a classroom, sharing my love for writing with students. Life began to settle into a new rhythm. Teaching, writing, and guest preaching filled my days, while my evenings were often spent reflecting on the past and the lessons I'd learned. 6 months after the divorce, Emily once again tried her hand at matchmaking, introducing me to a few new people. Despite her efforts, I wasn't ready to move on. The wounds from my marriage to Grace were still too fresh, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever be ready to open my heart again. One evening, Emily joined me on the porch, a cup of tea in her hand. "Brian," she said softly, "you've been through so much, but I believe there's still happiness waiting for you. It might take time, but don't give up on the idea of love." I nodded, her words resonating with me. Life, I realized, was a journey, a series of trials and triumphs that shaped who we are. Though my path had taken unexpected turns, I remained hopeful that brighter days lay ahead. Several months after settling back in Cedar Grove, I received an unexpected call from a former colleague at Summit Bible College. He mentioned that the college was looking for someone to take on a larger teaching role in the English department and suggested that I apply. I was hesitant at first, but ultimately decided to pursue the opportunity. Teaching creative writing had reignited my passion for storytelling, and the stability of a full-time position was appealing. During the interview, the department chair asked me about my writing background. I presented copies of my published novels, both the romance and young adult titles, which were written under the pseudonym Clara Jameson. He seemed impressed and offered me the position on the spot. As I transitioned into my new role, my days became busier than ever. Between teaching classes, mentoring students, and continuing to write, I hardly had time to dwell on the past. However, the memory of Grace lingered in quiet moments, and I often found myself visiting her grave, reflecting on what had been and what might have been. 6 months after Grace's passing, Emily once again took it upon herself to nudge me toward meeting new people. Though her intentions were well-meaning, I resisted at first. "Emily," I said one evening, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet." She smiled knowingly. "Brian, healing doesn't mean you forget the past. It means you learn to live with it and move forward. You deserve to find happiness again." Despite my initial reluctance, Emily's persistence eventually led me to attend a small gathering at her home. Among the guests was a woman named Sarah Hamilton, a high school English teacher who had recently moved to Cedar Grove. She was in her early 30s, with a warm smile and an easygoing demeanor that immediately put me at ease. We struck up a conversation about literature, and I was surprised at how natural it felt to talk to her. By the end of the evening, Emily had discreetly given Sarah my contact information, and a few days later, Sarah reached out to invite me for coffee. Our meeting at a local cafe was simple yet meaningful. We talked for hours about everything from favorite authors to life's unexpected twists and turns. It was the first time in years that I felt a genuine connection with someone, and it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I could open my heart again. Over the next several months, Sarah and I grew closer. She understood my past and never pushed me to move faster than I was comfortable with. Her patience and kindness were exactly what I needed, and slowly but surely, I found myself looking forward to the future instead of dwelling on the past. One sunny afternoon, as we walked through the Cedar Grove Farmers Market, Sarah turned to me with a smile. "Brian," she said, "I know you've been through a lot, but I want you to know how much I admire your strength. You've rebuilt your life in a way that's inspiring. And I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're part of mine." Her words touched me deeply, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Life had not turned out the way I had planned, but perhaps it was leading me towards something even better. Epilogue years later, as I stood at the pulpit of a new church in Madison, Wisconsin, I reflected on the winding road that had brought me to that moment. My journey had been filled with heartbreak and healing, loss and love. Through it all, I had learned to embrace life's imperfections and trust that even in the darkest times, there was always a path forward. Sarah sat in the front row, her smile a beacon of encouragement. Our story was just beginning, and though I didn't know what the future held, I was ready to face it with hope and gratitude. As the years went by, Sarah and I built a life filled with shared passions, laughter, and purpose. She continued teaching high school English, while I balanced my time between my writing, teaching at Summit Bible College, and guest preaching at nearby churches. Though I hadn't taken on a permanent pastoral role again, my faith remained a cornerstone of my life. One spring, Sarah and I made a decision that would change everything. Over breakfast one morning, she placed her hand on mine and said, "Brian, I've been thinking about something for a while now, and I want to know what you think." "Of course," I replied. "What's on your mind?" "What if we adopted?" she asked softly. "I know it's something you've thought about before, and I feel like now might be the right time for us to explore it." Her words took me by surprise, but they also filled me with a sense of hope and possibility. After everything I had been through, the idea of creating a family with Sarah felt like a chance to heal old wounds and create something beautiful. "I'd love that," I said, smiling. "Let's look into it." Over the next year, we navigated the lengthy and often challenging adoption process. There were moments of frustration and doubt, but Sarah's unwavering optimism kept us moving forward. Finally, after months of waiting, we received the news that a 3-year-old boy named Liam had been matched with us. Meeting Liam for the first time was a moment I'll never forget. He was shy at first, clutching a small stuffed bear as he looked up at us with wide, curious eyes. Sarah knelt down and introduced herself gently, and I followed suit. "Hi, Liam," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I'm Brian. It's so nice to meet you." He hesitated for a moment before reaching out and taking Sarah's hand. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. From that day forward, Liam became the center of our world. Parenthood brought a new kind of joy and challenge to our lives. Liam was curious and energetic, with a love of books that mirrored our own. Bedtime stories became a nightly ritual, with Sarah and I taking turns reading to him. It wasn't long before he began asking questions about my writing, and I found myself sharing age-appropriate versions of my young adult stories with him. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," he said, "when I grow up, I want to write stories too. Will you help me?" His words filled me with pride. "Of course, Liam. I'd love to help you. You can be anything you want to be." As Liam grew, so did our family. Sarah and I decided to adopt again, welcoming a baby girl named Emily into our lives when Liam was 7. Watching him step into the role of a protective older brother was heartwarming, and our family felt complete. Through it all, Sarah remained my anchor, her love and support a constant source of strength. Together, we navigated the ups and downs of life, always finding reasons to be grateful. Looking back, I often marveled at how far I had come. The pain of the past had shaped me, but it hadn't defined me. My journey had taught me that life's greatest blessings often came from unexpected places, and that faith, love, and resilience could carry us through even the darkest times. One evening, as the sun set over our backyard, I sat with Sarah and Liam on the porch swing, while Emily played in the grass nearby. The sound of laughter filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was beautiful in its own way, and that was more than enough. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and triumphs. Liam grew into a thoughtful teenager, his love for storytelling blossoming under my guidance. Emily, with her boundless energy and curiosity, brought constant joy to our lives. Parenting was not without its struggles. Navigating Liam's transition into adolescence and Emily's insatiable need for independence required patience and adaptability. But Sarah and I faced every hurdle together. My writing career took an unexpected turn when one of my young adult novels, Bridges to Tomorrow, caught the attention of a prominent publisher. The story, which dealt with themes of resilience and overcoming loss, resonated with readers and quickly gained traction. Before I knew it, I was receiving invitations to speak at literary conferences and schools. Balancing this newfound success with my responsibilities at home and at Summit Bible College was challenging, but Sarah's unwavering support made it possible. One day, while preparing for a guest lecture at a nearby university, I received a phone call from an editor at a major studio in Los Angeles. She expressed interest in adapting Bridges to Tomorrow into a feature film. My initial reaction was a mix of disbelief and excitement, but as the conversation continued, I realized the opportunity was real. When I shared the news with Sarah and the kids that evening, their reactions were priceless. Liam's eyes lit up with excitement, and Emily, who was now 10, immediately began planning how she would star in the movie. "Dad," Liam said, grinning, "can I come to the premiere when it's made? I'll tell all my friends I know the author." "Of course," I replied, laughing. "If this actually happens, you'll both be my guests of honor." The film project moved forward over the next 2 years, and watching my story come to life on the screen was an emotional experience. Sarah and I attended the premiere together, dressed in our best, with Liam and Emily by our side. As the lights dimmed and the opening credits rolled, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The journey from those dark days of heartbreak and loss to this moment of celebration and fulfillment was nothing short of extraordinary. Back in Cedar Grove, life returned to its familiar rhythm. My success as an author brought financial stability, allowing Sarah to scale back her teaching hours and spend more time pursuing her passion for painting. Our home became a hub of creativity, with Sarah's artwork adorning the walls and Liam and Emily constantly sharing their own imaginative projects. As my career grew, so did my desire to give back. I began organizing workshops for aspiring writers, particularly young people who had experienced hardship. Sharing my story and encouraging others to find healing through creativity became a mission close to my heart. One day, while working on my latest manuscript, Liam knocked on my office door. Now a senior in high school, he had inherited Sarah's calm demeanor and my penchant for introspection. "Dad," he said, stepping inside, "can I show you something I've been working on?" "Of course," I said, gesturing for him to sit. He handed me a notebook filled with handwritten pages. As I read through the first few chapters, I was struck by his talent and maturity as a writer. His story was raw, heartfelt, and deeply personal, dealing with themes of family, identity, and the complexities of growing up. "This is incredible, Liam," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You have a gift." He smiled shyly. "I guess I learned from the best." That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, I shared Liam's work with Sarah and Emily. It sparked a conversation about dreams, resilience, and the importance of pursuing one's passions. For the first time, I saw the full circle of my journey, how the pain of the past had been transformed into a legacy of love and creativity. As I reflected on the years that had passed, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life had not unfolded as I once envisioned, but it had given me so much more than I could have imagined. My family, my faith, and my stories had become the foundation of a life rich with meaning and purpose. And so, as I put the finishing touches on my latest manuscript, I looked out the window at the vibrant chaos of our backyard. Sarah painting on the porch, Emily chasing fireflies, and Liam sketching ideas in his notebook. The scene filled me with a quiet, profound joy. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. As Liam prepared to leave for college the following year, the house began to take on a quieter rhythm. Emily, now 13, was growing more independent, but she still enjoyed family game nights and bedtime stories, even if the stories had shifted to more complex themes. Watching my children step into their own futures filled me with pride, but it also stirred a bittersweet feeling as I realized how quickly time was passing. One crisp autumn afternoon, Liam and I loaded up the car for his move to college. He had chosen to attend the University of Wisconsin in Madison, just a few hours away. As we drove, the familiar landscape of Midwest farmland and small towns rolled by, and we talked about everything from his writing aspirations to adjusting to college life. "Dad," Liam said after a long pause, "do you think I'll ever have a story as powerful as yours? About life, faith, and love?" I glanced at him, smiling. "You don't need my story, Liam. You'll write your own. And it'll be just as meaningful because it'll be yours." He nodded thoughtfully, and for the rest of the drive, we shared memories and dreams for the future. Leaving Liam at his dorm was harder than I anticipated. As I hugged him goodbye, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness mixed with immense pride. "I'm just a call away," I told him, my voice steady but emotional. "And don't forget, your mom and I expect updates. Often." He laughed. "I'll call, Dad. Thanks for everything. Love you." As Sarah and I drove home, the house felt emptier without Liam's presence. Emily, ever observant, noticed the shift in our mood and took it upon herself to keep the atmosphere lively. She threw herself into her school projects, sports, and music, filling the house with energy and joy. One snowy evening, about a year after Liam left for college, I received an unexpected email. It was from a young woman named Clara Davis, who had attended one of my writing workshops. Clara had published a short story inspired by her experiences growing up in foster care, and she wanted to thank me for encouraging her to share her voice. Her message read, "Mr. Evans, I don't know if you remember me, but your workshop changed my life. You taught me that my story matters, and now it's being read by people who tell me it matters to them too. Thank you for giving me the courage to believe in myself." I read her words aloud to Sarah, who smiled warmly. "That's why you do this, Brian," she said. "You're not just telling your own story, you're helping others find theirs." Over the next few years, Liam graduated from college with honors, pursuing a career in publishing while continuing to write on the side. Emily, meanwhile, blossomed into a talented artist, her paintings finding their way into local galleries. Sarah and I grew older, but the love and partnership we shared only deepened with time. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she reached for my hand. "Brian," she said softly, "we've built a beautiful life, haven't we?" I looked at her, my heart full. "We have, and I'm grateful for every moment of it." Final reflection years later, as I approached my 70th birthday, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. Life had not always been kind, but it had been meaningful. Through the challenges and heartbreaks, I had discovered the power of resilience, the importance of faith, and the beauty of second chances. Standing in my study, surrounded by shelves of books, some written by me, many by others, I felt a profound sense of peace. My story was just one among many, but it was uniquely mine, shaped by the people I loved and the lessons I had learned. In the end, I realized life isn't about avoiding pain or seeking perfection. It's about embracing the journey, finding joy in the unexpected, and holding on to hope no matter what comes your way. And for that, I was deeply grateful. As the years continued to unfold, Sarah and I transitioned into a quieter phase of life. Retirement came naturally for both of us, though it hardly slowed us down. I stepped back from teaching at Summit Bible College but continued to write, my stories now deeply influenced by the richness of my life experiences. Sarah, ever the creative soul, expanded her art into community projects, mentoring young artists and organizing exhibitions at the local cultural center. Liam, now in his 30s, had built a successful career in publishing, splitting his time between editing and writing. His debut novel, Echoes of the Heart, earned critical acclaim and cemented his reputation as a promising author. Watching him thrive in a world I had once introduced him to filled me with immense pride. Emily, meanwhile, had established herself as a painter and illustrator. Her works, vibrant and evocative, graced galleries and book covers alike. When she held her first solo exhibition, Sarah and I were in the front row, tears of pride glistening in our eyes as she shared her journey with the audience. One summer evening, our family gathered at the house in Cedar Grove for a reunion. Liam had brought his partner, a bright and spirited editor named Marcus, while Emily arrived with her fiancé, a kind-hearted teacher named Alex. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of Sarah's famous pot roast wafting through the air. As we sat around the dinner table, the conversation turned reflective. "Dad, Liam began. Do you ever think about how everything turned out? I mean, life didn't exactly follow the path you expected, but here we all are. I smiled, looking around at the faces of my family. All the time, I said. Life rarely goes as planned, Liam. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that every twist and turn, every heartbreak and triumph, leads you to where you're meant to be. And sitting here with all of you, I wouldn't change a thing. Sarah reached for my hand, her eyes glistening with emotion. You always know what to say, she said softly. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to the future. Emily and Alex shared their plans to open a small art studio together, while Liam and Marcus talked about their dream of starting a nonprofit to support young writers from underrepresented communities. Hearing their dreams filled me with hope and gratitude. My children were not only pursuing their passions but also finding ways to give back, just as Sarah and I had tried to do throughout our lives. In the quiet moments after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself alone on the porch, gazing up at the stars. The night was calm, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the love, the loss, the lessons learned along the way. Life had not been without its challenges, but it had been filled with meaning and love. And as I sat there, surrounded by the memories of a life well lived and the promise of the future, I felt a profound sense of peace. For in the end, I realized, it is not the destination that defines us, but the journey. And mine had been a story worth telling.